In 2022, we celebrate 130 years of HBCU football. On December 27th, 1892, Livingstone and Biddle College, now known as Johnson C. Smith University, played in Salisbury, North Carolina, with Biddle winning 5-0. Over time, HBCU football has evolved. HBCU football's popularity continues to rise. Millions attend games each year and millions more watch on television. The HBCU bands provide some of the top entertainment in the country. Over that time, some of the best players to ever play in the National Football League played at HBCUs. Every Monday through Friday on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, national radio and television host Donal Ware takes a look at what's happening in HBCU football and talks with coaches, players, administrators, and media about the 2022 season. Make sure you join the conversation on social media by using the hashtag HBCU130. Now, here's your host, Donal Ware.
You got it locked to the HBCU Football Daily Podcast for today, Friday, August 26th. I'm Donal Ware. It's Friday! And the HBCU football season kicks off on tomorrow. We've got 3 football games for you on tomorrow. Today on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, we're going to preview the HBCU National Game of the Week. Going to tell you what that game is. We want to talk about some of the matchups. You're looking at Florida A&M and Edward Waters getting together in Miami Gardens, Florida, in the Big Cat Classic on tomorrow. I like what both Edward Waters and Florida Memorial are doing. Edward Waters, not yet, not quite making that move, though, to the SIAC. I believe next year is when Edward Waters will have full SIAC membership. I can remember going back to the early part of the 2000s, 2001, 2002, when Edward Waters brought its football program back in conjunction with a lot of schools during that time. Shaw, one of those schools. There's a couple of other schools that Allen brought football back. Allen also making its way to the SIAC as well. So I like what Edward Waters is doing, and Florida Memorial in terms of having HBCU football in Miami. When you have the bigger the city where you can have HBCU football, the better. The opportunity for more media coverage. I mean, when you're talking about Miami, you're talking about a top 15 media market. So that bodes well for HBCU football. HBCUs really as a whole. You've got to be able to get those mediums to get on board. You've got the Miami Herald, the big newspaper there. You've got the television stations that are there as well. So you need to be able to get those mediums on board for the coverage. But I think it's great when you're on in Miami. Of course, if you look at Edward Waters and you look it being in Jacksonville, I think Jacksonville may be the largest city by population in the state of Florida. Perhaps. I know Miami's more well known, but don't sleep on Jacksonville at all either. So you have that matchup as well. You also have Florida A&M playing at UNC. Then you have the HBCU National Game of the Week, which we're going to preview. The game is in Atlanta. It is MEAC versus SWAC. It is Howard versus Alabama State. And so this should be, I think, an interesting football game. Last year when you thought about the MEAC SWAC challenge and all that the MEAC had been through entering the 2021 season, first of all, not having played in 2020 because of COVID, or played in the spring of 2021 like other conferences did, including the SWAC. So basically the last season prior of football prior to the 2021 season was 2019. I mean, you did have, you didn't have MEAC play, but you had Howard, Delaware State, that played, South Carolina State, that played some football games. But entering last year's MEAC SWAC challenge, a lot of upheaval when you're talking about the MEAC. North Carolina A&T, the first to leave to join the Big South. Then shortly thereafter, Florida A&M leaves to join the SWAC. Very shortly thereafter that, Bethune-Cookman also leaves to join the SWAC. So now you're down to 6 football playing institutions. Everybody thinks the MEAC is dead in the water. And ultimately, that game between Alcorn State and North Carolina Central, I think most would have thought, I would have too, that Alcorn State would have been the favorite coming into that football game. Alcorn State's domination of the SWAC, the last, especially the Eastern Division, the last 6 or 7 years, has been duly noted. It's been almost historic in some respects. And then you had a North Carolina Central team that definitely had some talent, no question about that. You have, Trey Oliver as the head football coach, although he had a 2019 season, didn't have a 20 season, et cetera, et cetera. And North Carolina Central pulled off that football game. I think that was a bit of an upset. This game between Howard and Alabama State, a little, you have some storylines, right? You've got Eddie Robinson Jr., now the head football coach at Alabama State in his first season. You've got Larry Scott at Howard. I think Howard's going to be improved this year. And I'm going to start with Howard. It begins from an offensive perspective, but it's not the only thing they have offensively. I think Howard is going to have a pretty solid offense, but it begins with the quarterback, Quentin Williams. He's really shown some flashes that, and I think last year he really did some really good things. He's a guy that can pass the football, has got good pocket presence. I mean, when you look at him, he threw for over 2,300 yards last year, 16 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. He also completed 58% of his passes on last year. And he's a guy that can run with the football. I think the latter part of the season is where you really saw Williams kind of come out. I remember sitting down and watching a Thursday night game. It was Howard and Morgan State. And boy, it was on ESPNU. It was just, it may have been a Friday night, actually. It was just not a very good football game at all. Neither team looked good, and I think Morgan, if I'm not mistaken, Morgan came out with the victory. But I think Williams looked better the second half of the season, and he has a deep threat in Antoine Murray. 7 touchdown receptions. He caught somewhere like 33 balls, but he averaged over 19 yards per carry. So he's a guy that's a deep threat. And I think the receiving core for Howard is going to be pretty solid. And the offensive line is going to be good for Howard. It's coming in as well. But I think where the Bison will excel this year is in the running back department. You've got Ian Willer and you've got Jarrett Hunter. These two combined rushed for over 1,000 yards last year and 11 touchdowns. So when you look at Howard from that perspective, I mean, I think this is a very, very solid offense. Let's look at Alabama State's defense. I think this is where Alabama State is going to be strong. And I talked about the passing game. I think Howard's passing game is going to be really, really good with Williams and a deep threat Murray. But when you look at this Alabama State defense, the strength of the defense is in the secondary. HBCU All-American Ershad Davis is the safety. So he's a guy that can get it done both in the run game. I mentioned Howard's run game is going to be key. He's going to have to be a key to that. Now, if he's coming up and making a lot of tackles, that's going to be a bit of an issue, I think, for Alabama State. If Ershad Davis from his safety position has to come up and make a lot of tackles. But this young man can play. And then also in the secondary, you have Natron Culpepper and Keenan Isaacs. So this makes for a very formidable Alabama State defense that I think is going to be one that is going to be pretty solid and is going to have to be pretty solid when going up against a Howard offense. I think, with Larry, I think Larry Scott's a really, really good football coach. I think he's got a good staff. Howard has not been very good lately in terms of its football program. And it hasn't necessarily been historically outside of the late 80s through the mid 90s when you talk about, Jay Walker and all of those guys. I mean, they had some really, really, Steve Wilson was coach. He had some really, really good football teams. But Howard, it's an academically driven institution. And it's much like, I would compare it very much to Duke when you're talking about from an academic perspective, and not getting not being able to really elevate that football program as it relates to how the university is seen and known, notably both universities for that matter, really throughout the world, and not as much on the football side. But we'll see. I think Larry Scott can change that, particularly with some commitment from the university as a whole. Let's take a look at Alabama State's offense. Okay, no Ryan Nettles. First of all, again, as I mentioned, Donald Hill-Ely had been the head coach there 4 or 5 years. He's not there anymore. Enter Eddie Robinson Jr., who is an alum, and he's hit the ground running. No Ryan Nettles at the quarterback. We saw him in some of the things that he could do, some of the potential that he had on last year. But Alabama State brings in Auburn transfer quarterback Demetrius Davis, excuse me for mispronouncing his name. Now, he didn't take a snap. He was a highly recruited quarterback out of high school in Texas. Didn't take a snap at Auburn. They like him there in Montgomery. So we'll see. I mean, you're entering sort of a different, in Texas high school, football is big time, no question about it. But this is the college level, and it's going to be a Howard team that I think is going to be tough. I'll talk more about the Howard defense momentarily. No Ezra Gray at the running back position, but you got a young man by the name of Ja'Cory Merritt who actually led the Hornets last year in terms of carries. He had 120 carries. He had 5 touchdowns. He averaged about 3.5 yards per carry. While he had the most carries, he wasn't the main back. I would still consider Ezra the main back. However, Ja'Cory Merritt got a majority of the carries. So they're going to have to rely on, I think, Merritt a little bit. And we'll see what Mr. Davis looks like in terms of being able to throw that football. Highly recruited kid. Didn't play at Auburn, so we'll see ultimately what that looks like. Going against the Howard defense that really has to improve. One of the keys to that defensive lineman, Darion Brokenberg. Now, this is a young man that had 3.5 sacks last year, had 5 tackles for loss. He's able to, tie those offensive linemen up and allow for some of the linebackers to be able to make plays for the Bison. He's going to have to be key, obviously, for Howard defensively against Alabama State, who, again, we still have some unknown at the quarterback position, but the offensive line at Alabama State right now is pretty good. But I think Ja'Cory Merritt's that guy that's going to break out from a running back perspective. And he's going to carry the load. I mean, this is a guy that had 120 carries as your secondary running back last year. I mean, that's a fair amount of carries. That's about 12 carries a game. I think you'll see that up to maybe 15, 16 carries per game throughout the course of the season. Maybe in this game he gets 20 carries. I think if he is able to get that many carries in the ball game and get, somewhere right around 100 yards or so, I think that may bode well for Alabama State. Hard to really kind of predict these kinds of games. First game of the season, it's not like it's a conference game where you can really gauge, and generally you don't play conference games early on, but where you can kind of get a feel for what may be happening. This is, 2 leagues that probably need to probably play more games, talking about the MEAC and the SWAC outside of classics, if you will. I mean, you saw the last couple of seasons where Alabama A&M and South Carolina State played. So hopefully we'll see more of that in the very near future. But it's hard to really get a gauge. I'm going to give you a prediction. I am going to give you a prediction. Of course, this game is in Atlanta. I think this is a game that Howard is going to win. I think that Quentin Williams has improved. Last year, again, second half of the season, I thought he did well, had a good spring. He's got some weapons. He's got a running game. He's got some receivers. He's got a good offensive line. And while I don't know that Howard's defense is great, there are some question marks to me right now, as we stand right now coming in. We could see coming out of this game where the Alabama State offense really sits. So I'm going to, I don't know about the score. I don't know if it's going to be a high scoring game or anything like that. It's just a first game prediction. We may get into predicting scores and all of those kind of things, or at least, saying what the score range may be as we do these each and every week with these HBCU National Games of the Week previews. But that said, I like Howard over Alabama State. So that's about it for today's HBCU Football Daily Podcast. Thank you for joining us. We've been doing this since July the 18th of this year. This is the 6th year of the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. Thank you to those that are now watching. We know that a lot of the movement is in terms of watching as opposed to listening, but we got you covered for both. You can watch here, of course, on the BOXTOROW YouTube page. You can also listen to the HBCU Football Daily Podcasts on our website at BOXTOROW.com. You can also listen at iHeartMedia.com and wherever you may get your podcast. And of course, we want you to tell a couple of friends about the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. Also of note, the radio program, BOXTOROW, the radio program, airs tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern, that's 6 p.m. Central Time and 4 p.m. Pacific Time on ESPNU Radio on Sirius XM. That's channel 84. And you can listen to the program throughout the weekend on a radio station near you. You can log on to our website at BOXTOROW.com and find a radio station in your area that carries the program. And you can also listen on satellite radio on Saturday morning, 9 o'clock. That's 8 a.m. Central Time and 6 a.m. for those out west on Sirius XM channel 142 HBCU. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll talk with you on Monday.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. You can also listen to the podcast at BOXTOROW.com, iHeartMedia, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to get your HBCU football fix on BOXTOROW with Donal Ware each weekend on the radio station near you, and on Sirius XM on HBCU, channel 142, and on ESPNU Radio on Sirius XM, channel 84. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at BOXTOROW for the latest in HBCU football, and don't forget to tell a friend.